Somewhere, thousands of years ago, a man is holding a newborn. He's doing the math in his head, counting back the months. And he is realizing that as long as he lives, he will never be sure this child is his. There's no hospital, no test, no way to settle it. Just him, the baby, and a question with no answer. So how did anyone back then ever know who the father was? For most animals, the question never even comes up. A lion mates and walks off. A male bear might never see its cubs again. Being a father costs them nothing. Then there's us. A human baby can't walk, can't feed itself, can't last one night alone. It needs 10 years of someone deciding to stay. And here's the thing that bent the whole story out of shape. A mother always knows the baby is hers. A father never does. That sounds like a small gap. It wasn't. If a man spent 20 years feeding and guarding a child that wasn't his line just ended, quietly, for good. Evolution doesn't punish that with pain. It punishes it by deleting you from the future. So this was never about feelings. It was about staying alive, which drops you right back on the same impossible question. With no test, how do you know? Picture where that question actually lived. A band of maybe 30 people. A winter that takes the weak ones first and takes them early. Every scrap of food is paid for, in cold, in risk, in somebody walking out before dawn and not always coming back. A man might bring down one large animal in a week, if he's lucky, and that meat decides who eats and who doesn't. In a place like that, backing the wrong child isn't a bad day. It's everything you are, erased one meal at a time, and there is no way to check, no proof anywhere. Nothing a man can hold up to the light and say, there, now I'm sure. He looks at the child, he looks at the woman, he looks at the other men in the band, and he just doesn't know. So people did what people always do when survival is on the line. They built something. The first thing they built wasn't a rule, it was a feeling. We call it love now. But staying with one person, year after year, didn't start as romance. It started as math. Stay close to one woman, and the odds the children are yours go up. Not to certainty, just up. And when you've got no other tools, better odds are the whole game. Helen Fisher spent decades studying attachment across cultures, and the evidence kept pointing the same way. What looks like a love story works more like a survival strategy with a timer bolted onto it. Long enough to carry a fragile kid through the years most likely to kill it. But staying close only shrank the doubt. It never killed it. The question was still there every single morning, so the brain found another door in. It started reading faces. You do this. You did it this week. You see a baby and something in you instantly checks. Whose nose, whose eyes, whose stubborn little mouth. Researchers found that people go hunting for that resemblance without ever deciding to. And here's how old this really is. The father's own family, his mother, his brothers and sisters are the ones most likely to swear the baby is the spitting image of him, even when it isn't. Even when you measure it and the numbers say no. They see something that isn't on the child's face. Because convincing that one man mattered so much to whether the baby lived that the human brain simply learned to make the proof up. And when reading faces wasn't enough, something darker stepped in, jealousy. It turns up in nearly every human culture anyone has ever studied. That's not a coincidence, and it isn't a character flaw, it's a guard dog. For an ancient man, a partner straying didn't just sting. It threatened to hand his entire life's work to another man's bloodline. Every winter he survived, every animal he dragged home. Every night, he didn't sleep so the fire stayed lit. All of it could end up feeding a child that carried someone else's blood. So the men who felt nothing, who shrugged, who didn't watch and didn't guard, tended to raise children that were never theirs, and they disappeared. Every man alive today comes down from the ones who couldn't let it go. The jealousy you feel isn't a weakness. It's something you inherited. Then there were the people who threw out the whole idea of one father. Stephen Beckerman documented more than 18 groups across the Amazon. The Bari, the Ach, others. They believed something biology calls flat out impossible. They believed a child could have more than one father. That if several men were with a woman while she was pregnant, each one added a piece to the baby. So each one owed it something. To us, that sounds like a story somebody made up around a fire. So watch what it actually did. Children with several fathers survived more often than children with one. More men brought meat. More men stood watch. More hands when the kid got sick. The belief was dead wrong and quietly brilliant. And that is the moment to notice the one thing none of these people could see from the inside. None of it was ever about knowing. Not the staying close, not the faces, not the jealousy, not the relatives swearing about his chin, not the multiple fathers, not the weddings that came later, not the inheritance laws, not the surname a man pressed onto his children like a stamp into hot wax. None of it answered the question. It couldn't. The question had no answer. Not then. Not for thousands of years. What all of it did was smaller. And somehow so much bigger, it made men sure enough to stay. Sure enough to hunt for a child instead of only for themselves. Sure enough to build a whole life around a bet they could never actually win. Certainty was never the prize. It couldn't be. Confidence was. And confidence was enough to build everything. The family, the bloodline, the household, the law, the entire world you are sitting inside right now. Which is why you still do every piece of this, with a lab one phone call away. You feel it in the half-second you study a photo for a familiar nose. You feel it in the cold drop in your gut when someone says, "We need to talk." An alarm going off over a betrayal that threatens no bloodline, that costs you nothing an ancient man would even recognize, and still it screams. You feel it when you argue about whose side a kid takes after. When you watch a stranger lean over a stroller and say, "Oh, he's got his father's eyes," and you watch the father stand a little taller without knowing why. When you care far more than makes any sense about a last name and who is going to carry it. That isn't your personality, it's machinery. The same wiring that kept a man by the fire instead of wandering off is the thing tightening your chest tonight. We built cities, we built phones. We built a test that ends the whole question in a single afternoon. None of it reached the part of you that was set in place long before any of it existed. The science changed, the instincts did not. So go back to him one last time, the man with the newborn, counting months he can never check. In a world that is never once going to hand him an answer. He has been dead for thousands of years. And he is also sitting right behind your ribs, doing the exact same thing, reaching for proof, settling for trust, choosing to stay without ever being sure. He never knew. He stayed anyway. And every time you reach for a certainty you can't quite hold, that ancient man is reaching with you.